No.
Wait, what does that mean? We are live.
It means I'm broadcasting over the internet. The sound of my voice.
Kim? This is like iCarly pretty much.
Okay. So, yeah, turn to the notes. Make sure you're taking notes. Like I said, I'm recording this because I'm trying to. Yeah, I mean, if you want to watch this later, you can. It's also for the people who may not be in here at the moment. But it's the voice, and then it takes the screen and puts them together, basically. No, you're not in it. It won't work like that. If you want there to be a part where you jump in front of the camera and are on the camera, I can make that happen later. So what I want to talk to you about today are some of the early explorations that took place. Why they happened, how people did them, how successful were they. We're going to talk about two main countries. That's basically Spain and Portugal. And so here's our main idea. During the age of exploration and expansion, Europeans expanded around the globe and came into more contact with other societies. So this is what we're talking about. Whenever we talk about this exploration, we're talking really. Here's the big change. That's what I want to get to. So in Europe, you had the Renaissance, you had the Reformations, you had new ways of thinking about life, man's place in the world, and religion. One of the things the Renaissance opened up or started to was that, again, here comes that humanist, secularist thing. Like, I mean, exploration wasn't, people didn't go out just to explore. Some did. There were other motivations, but part of that desire to explore and discover new things was part of that secularism, the idea that, for instance, it's worth exploring the world because it's worth knowing about. And it wouldn't be like challenging God to try to discover those things, as some people might say, that like God would not be happy if you went exploring because he wants it all to be a mystery or something like that. So this changed the entire world because all of the parts from this point on until today have basically been interconnected. It used to be, before this time, that parts of the world were kind of isolated from each other. They would have contact. Someone in Europe might know about what China was like or where, Africa was, but nobody is really talking about North and South America or has much knowledge of it. And there are people there, besides the people there, they know about it. And but it interconnects all the different parts of the world to the situation today where you're all wearing stuff from another continent. You're carrying stuff on your person from another continent. This room is filled with stuff from other continents. So we're looking at it in three parts. First off, how this all kind of starts and why. Second, we're going to look at let's try and go to the video. There we go. I'll come back to that. It's going to look at Portugal and Spain and how they were the first countries to sort of get into this. And finally, we're going to look at the Voyage of Magellan, this thing that really proves by doing it that the world is round. Okay, so let's talk first about some of the early explorations. We'll come back to the compass there. Now, this is why they explored. Now, we boiled it down. This wasn't like a motto. They didn't walk around going, "Why are you exploring? God, golden glory." That's not what this is. But if you want to boil it down and say what kinds of reasons they have for exploring, these are the reasons. Let's talk the God part first. Christianity, especially, is a missionary religion. It's people. It's in Christianity that it's you're supposed to, if you are a Christian, go tell other people and spread the message. That's not the case in all world religions. Some, like Buddhism, for instance, Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, they don't have a component where you're supposed to go tell people about it. That's just not part of it. So Christians, especially Catholic Christians, were interested in trying to spread this to other parts of the world. Once the Spanish, for instance, find out that there are people in the Americas, the Incas, the Aztecs, other Amerindian peoples, that they've never heard about Jesus, basically, this is a huge opportunity for, and the Pope gets behind it, to spread Christianity to those people. So they want to spread it to other places around the world. You've also got a little bit of a thing where you did have a struggle between Christian nations and empires and Islamic ones, and there was some fear that if Islamic countries got to these other parts of the world, they might spread Islam, but they weren't really interested in doing that at the time anyway. As soon as I throw on this Google Hangouts, like everything gets slow. Okay, so that's the God part. Let's talk gold. Now, when we say gold, we mean, yes, we mean like actual gold. That was definitely part of it. But we're also talking riches for other ways. Now, remember, when we talk about the Renaissance in Italy up here, they were getting rich because they were along a trade route right along here. And as soon as this thing catches up, I'll scroll up. There we go. So you have Italian merchants who can trade with the Far East. They're trading in spices, rice, different textiles like silk and things like that. They're trading it to the rest of Europe, and they're getting rich off it. Now, the problem for countries like Spain and Portugal is they're not really, they can't get into that racket. See what? Yeah. So Spain and Portugal, they're kind of left out of that. So, but they're going to try to figure out how can we get into that trade thing. See you, Tyler. So the gold thing is not just precious metals gold. It's also just riches in general. If you get access to trade, you can trade with people, you can make a lot of money. Finally, there's the glory part. So countries, the way that you were powerful in that time, and maybe still today, is you controlled a lot of other places. You brought them underneath your control. You conquered them. You took their resources. And that made you more powerful. And that continues right up until even today. Anybody ever played any of the Civilization games in here? Okay, handful. These sometimes apply to this, believe it or not. Okay. So let's talk about this. Europeans wanted, this is one of the main motivators of trying to find ways to get to Asia. That's basically the way to boil it down. Spices. Pepper was a big one. It's a common household spice now. It's cheap. It's on your table. It's readily available. But pepper was something that Europeans, it's not grown in Europe. They had to go somewhere else to get it. Nutmeg, cinnamon, anything you could think of that you now can buy at Target was very, very difficult and expensive to get. Even if you actually go to the shopping market and look at how much spices cost per pound, they're still expensive based on weight. Anyway, so Italy's already got their sort of thing going on, trading for these spices. So you've also got in the middle there the Ottoman Empire, which is an Islamic empire. It's hostile to Christians, and in many cases, they make trade more difficult with those areas. So people are looking for quicker routes to the east, or we could say Asia. So what do you got? You got people that want to try to sail there. You're going to need some advances in technology. Now, let's just look at the map here. All right, so what are your options? First off, the problem is they don't have a lot of knowledge about, if you're a navigator, you know the world is round at that time. There's no flat earthers sailing ships, okay? Regular people may have thought the earth was flat, but for the most part, if you studied this stuff, you knew it was round. They had proved that thousands of years before. Okay, so the world's round. They know that. They know you're not going to fall off the edge. And so they think, okay, we're here, Spain, Portugal. How do we get over here? Their maps are not anywhere near as good as this is. So how do we get over there? Okay, we go around the world. Well, they know if they go north, it's going to get a bit cold. Not a good option. Some are thinking westward. We'll get to them in a second, but most are thinking eastward because it's got some easier issues to deal with. First off, you can stick to the land as you travel around. And while you're not going to like vacation anywhere, you can at least stop off for fresh water, which you need to get occasionally. You could stop off and maybe get food. And you won't get lost if you keep in sight of land. So you can sail down, south around Africa, north up the coastline, and then into the Indian Ocean and into all the areas here that have all those riches you want. Okay, so that's an option. Now, one other option, which eventually becomes a modern day one, is you could go here in the Mediterranean and then go across the Sinai Peninsula here and then sail through there. Eventually, in the 1800s, they built a canal so you could just drive your ship right through there, but that's not really an option that's available to anybody then. Okay, so those are the directions you can go. Those are the different options you have. What do you need to do it? First off, you need sailors trained in navigation. Now, it's really quite simple. If you have some basic measuring devices, I've made a great depiction of the globe here. This is the North Star, my attempt at drawing the North Star. It's the northernmost star in the northern hemisphere, and it basically, for our purposes, never moves based on where we're standing because it's millions of light years away. So this thing really never moves. It's sort of a fixed point that anybody can look at, find in the sky, and take measurements off it. So it's really easy to tell how far north and south you are because if you're at 0 degrees, crap, it's latitude, right? Or is it longitude? If you're at 0 degrees, the North Star is directly overhead. If you're at 45, the angle is going to be a bit lower where you see it. It'll be lower to the horizon. And if you're at the equator, it'll be nearly invisible or right on the horizon. Now, you go to the southern hemisphere, there's another point of measurement, which I don't know. So it's really easy to tell how far north and south you are, relatively easy. The problem is, in terms of east and west, there's no fixed reference point because the globe spins. So you have to develop some other methods, and what they use is something called dead reckoning. Dead reckoning works like this. You get on your boat in Lisbon, and you sail. You use a compass to tell which direction you're sailing. Okay? Sailing, west, just straight up on the dot west. The problem is you can't even really do that. You can't just pick a direction and sail it. It's more complicated than that. But you sail in that direction, let's say. Let's say you're lucky. You use an hourglass to measure the hours that you spend traveling that distance. And you actually use a rope with a log that you drop into the water to judge the speed at which you're traveling. So you're already got some really not very accurate stuff. You're using an hourglass. You can't time seconds. Minutes, not really, and hours, you're pretty close. You've got this rope that you're using to try to figure out how fast you're going. That's where the term knots comes from for speed while sailing. So what you're doing is you're taking the direction you're traveling, you're taking the time you travel and the speed at which you're traveling, and you're trying to figure out where you are. It would be like if you were in a car and you had a speedometer and a stopwatch and a compass, and you were trying to figure out how far you had driven. Even in ships, you're not sailing in a straight direction the whole time. You have to tack. You have to go back and forth across the wind. Anyway, so you need sailors who are pretty good at that, and that's why their maps are very good. Your maps are going to get better and better over time, but, that's tricky for them too. You also need the type of ship that can take going across the ocean, which we'll look at in a second. The compass probably may have originated in China. There's some debate, but this is going to allow them to determine their direction. We'll skip this one. We're short on time today. Okay, so what do you need in terms of ships? The first thing you have is that many ships before this were what was called square-rigged. Square-rigged ships means it has that traditional rectangular sail. It's called square-rigged not because the sail is a square, but because it's rigged side to side. So it's perpendicular to the length of the boat. Now, those are great when the wind is at your back, but you can't get anything out of them when you're trying to sail against the wind. So that's why most of those ships usually had oarmen. They were called galleys. So you go with the wind, you use the sail, you're going against the wind, you take the sails down, and everybody rows. That's not a good way to travel around Africa. It's going to take a lot of energy. So they developed something called the lateen sail. And the lateen sail is an angled sail. And because of different physics stuff that I don't quite understand and aerodynamics, these allow you to sail into the wind to some degree. You can't sail directly into the wind. That's basically impossible. But you can sail close to the wind. And so what these ships do is, because they don't have to go with the wind, let's say the wind is coming from this direction. These ships allow you to do something called tacking. So let's say our little boat is here, and we want to get to up here. What we're going to do is we're first going to sail in this direction. And then when we travel a certain distance, we're gonna bring the sails in, we're gonna hit the rudder hard, and we're gonna bring it back in this direction. And so on until we reach our point. So you have to tack back and forth. So that's how you sail into the wind. So you have to even use that when you're trying to figure out where you are. Anyway, but those sails allow you to do that. So now ships are much more flexible in their sailing. So this allows them to do that. You put those sails plus a rudder and plus a shallower draft, and you get something called the caravel, which it's a ship that can travel very close to beaches, but also is handy at sea. Okay. Enough nautical history. So what about Spain and Portugal? Now, Portugal is going to go the eastern way. They're going to try to go around Africa. That's their ticket. Okay, we'll go around Africa. So they do that. They put together a school for navigators. It's led by Prince Henry the Navigator, who never went to sea, but he got the nickname because he taught people and sponsored them in learning how to navigate. They discover these islands here, and that's going to be Portugal's way. They're going to try to go this way. Okay, cool. Okay, so who were their explorers? Two big ones. Bartholomew Diaz, 1487. He gets to the southern tip of Africa and discovers, hey, this thing turns north eventually, which means that we can sail around it and we can try to get to India. That's what they did. Vasco da Gama takes his own expedition around the Cape of Good Hope, gets to Asia. When he's there, he tries to persuade them to trade with the Portuguese, but he fails. They basically say, you don't have anything we want. We're not going to trade with you. Sorry. But eventually the Portuguese show up again and they force them to trade, but he's not successful. Okay, Spanish are going to try a different way. They're going to go west. They know the world is round. They think, haha, if we just sail west, they don't know there's a whole continent in the way, 2 continents. If we just sail west, we'll eventually get to Asia. We'll get what we want, and everything's going to be great. Spain's also kind of just arriving on the scene at that time. They had just recently unified. There was no Spain before this happened. They had driven out the Islamic Moors from the country. So they're kind of like looking to make a mark for themselves. Columbus goes to the people with the money, the king and the queen, and he asks for funding for his explorations. Now, people say Columbus was stupid. He didn't have accurate maps. He miscalculated. He thought that the continents were a little bit bigger and the world was a little smaller. And so he thought if I sail westward, it's not more than a few hundred, maybe 1,000 miles before we'll get to Asia. Anyway, his expedition gets backed. The famous 3 ships, we won't bother reciting their names. They're drilled into your head in 4th grade. Anyway, eventually they make landfall on an island in the Bahamas. I had to clear up a misconception in the last class because, and it happens a lot, the young lady said, so Columbus didn't discover America? She said, didn't discover the United States. I said, no. He found the Americas for Europeans. There happened to be millions of people living there already. And he didn't land on the continent itself. He landed on some of the islands, Hispaniola, Cuba, places like that. He was convinced he had found Asia, but he did not think he was in India. He thought he was in what were called the East Indies, which were islands in Southeast Asia. Anyway, he thought he'd found Asia, but a year after he died, Amerigo Vespucci suggested that maybe he had actually discovered a new world, new continents. And that's what Ferdinand Magellan begins to operate under. Okay. Important note. Magellan is Portuguese, but he sails for the Spanish. Just like Columbus was Italian, sailed for the Spanish. nationality in that time is not as important as it might be today. I mean, you had your country you were from, but you weren't necessarily like, I'll explore for my country or something. You went for who had the money and who was going to pay you to do it. So Magellan says, okay, I'm gonna sail westward, but he knows there's a continent in the way, so he's going to try to figure out how to get around it. It's a rough trip. Moving on. So they hit South America basically. They sail southward. They say, this is like when you play, like I said, those civilization games, and you got your little boat and you're sailing it around the coast, and you don't know when this thing's going to turn west. They get all the way down here, and eventually it turns west, and now they sail into the Pacific Ocean. They end up sort of island hopping, stopping in different places. They end up in the Philippines at one point, and that's where Magellan dies. Eventually, they get back to Spain. Takes I guess that's close to 3 years. 18 survivors make it. It proves that the globe is round. They knew that, but this proves it definitively. It adds to the knowledge about how actually big the Earth was, and it proves that all the oceans were connected. There are maps that people have made of the world where they show what we now know as oceans. They pictured them more like really big lakes, basically, and they thought it might all be connected by land. This proves that everything's sort of connected by water. And that wraps it up. Way to hang in there. Hello. Okay. So what do we got time for? All right, what I want you to do right now is take a couple minutes to look back through your notes and update them, and then look at today's SMART assessment. We will have time to take the SMART assessment today. So I'll give you, how many questions are there? 5? 4. All right, we'll take 4 minutes. Make sure you're logged in SMART. Go. Can you try one of these up here? There are 5? All right. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, just skip them today. I'll get you one. What was I doing?